I'm excited about this panel. In my introductory remarks this morning, I described the continued explosion of activity in competitions and investment in the digital games and esports industries. But at the collegiate level, when I first got involved with this, I was struck by the almost chaotic and uncertain paths various universities and colleges were pursuing. Paths taken and not taken. Student interest is undeniable. How should universities treat esports and competition and game playing on their campuses? Should they do nothing? Should they organize clubs, intramural leagues? Should they organize and sponsor a varsity team? And in what department? Should they organize at the conference level? Or should they utilize the services of outside experts like Tyler for advice and alternatives? It just struck me as the Wild West, and that's why I named the panel. Is this the Wild West? And that's what I hope this panel will be about, to give you some different perspectives from people intimately involved in this activity going on at the collegiate level. I want to introduce one panelist at a time, but first I want to introduce Chris Meyeres at the far end. Chris is a junior. He's a triple major in finance, business analytics, and information systems. A triple major, that's hard for me to relate to. I had a hard enough time majoring in political science when I was in college. But Chris, with the help of several other OU students, has formed the Bobcat Esports Club, focusing on empowering gaming and competition and community interest in gaming here at OU. He's been a real leader and activist on campus here in all things games and competitions. He's going to co-moderate this panel with me. He'll have much better questions than I might have. So, Chris, thank you. But our first panelist is Tyler Schrodt. Tyler started in esports in 2001 as a Counter-Strike 1.6 player and a tournament organizer. He spent 6 years working in higher education before founding EGF, the Electronic Gaming Federation. In 2013, he was studying finance at RIT. Today, EGF oversees a national league of some of the largest universities in the country, including our friends at Ohio State. Are the Ohio State folks here today? Okay, there they are. And the first state-endorsed national high school esports league in the country. Please help me welcome Tyler to our conference.
Thank you for having me. So my role in life with EGF at this point is really the organization of formalized programs across both college and high school. So when we talk about formalized programs, it means that the university has actively endorsed the program. Sometimes they're scholarship-based. And for all intents and purposes, they're treated very similarly to a varsity athletics program, but they will be outside of athletics because of a variety of regulatory things. So when we started working, I was still a student at RIT, and we started because I was working in residence life, trying to figure out a way to engage with the students, because at RIT we're very proudly very nerdy, and that comes with a lot of the stereotypes that you'd expect, including trying to get students out of their dorm room being a huge pain in the ass. So while I was working in res life and in student conduct, the challenge was always, how do you engage those students? How do you get them out of their dorm room? And how do you get them to feel a part of the community? So after a long battle with my administration, they started letting me run video game tournaments, and the response was incredible. So we continued to run tournaments on my campus. It spread to other campuses, and then it evolved from what we did with clubs into now we work with administrations across a variety of campuses, both in high school and in college. So when we started to design the league structure for that, we use the analogy of the NCAA specifically because we speak to the sort of sophistication that exists in that ecosystem. But the basic principles of how we wanted to design the ecosystem was focused on One, making sure that the league and ecosystem was always in the best interest of the student. So that's why things like amateurism don't exist in our world. Commercialization is a big part of how we approach general problems. Two was equity. So things talking about accessibility and other elements of gender equity and other components that were needed to be addressed because we took the position that if we were the system, if there were systemic issues, they were our issues to address. And so we started to think about how that worked. And third, how do you use esports as a platform for a variety of things across campus? So for us, that means starting with competition, but also using esports in the context of education, social impact, commercialization, and a variety of other things that esports kind of ends up being this really sort of cool universal platform for. Just because everybody in some capacity works with video games, whether they're playing them, whether they have a friend or a family member who plays video games and really sees that as a key part of their life. And so that's how we designed the system. So our role now is one is the governing body, so handling all the league logistics and the basic things that you find with tournament operators. Our league at the college level specifically works with only Division I schools. We work with schools like Ohio State and a variety of others, especially in the Power 5 group. And the idea was to make sure that we could sort of set a standard for what would exist not just here in the U.S. but in other countries around the world. At the high school level, we work with state associations, districts, and others that are generally more focused on engagement, but really hit that high-level league. The second thing that we do is a lot of program development assistance. So that's kind of taking all the principles that I just talked about and turning them into action items. So building blueprints with schools to talk about, how do you build out a competitive team? What does the staffing associated with that look like? What does a facility look like? Not just in principle, but also, in actual design. Talking about social impact initiatives. So for us, those are specifically focused on things like inclusiveness, diversity, and mental health and wellness is a really big one for us. And then on the commercial side, making sure that all these programs are sustainable because we found a lot of schools were really excited about esports, but they don't always know how to put that into practice. And a big question that we always get is how do we pay for this and how do we make sure that in 5 years these programs are doing really well and making sure that they're, in the volatile world of higher education budgeting, that, this doesn't become the first thing that gets cut when there's some trying times. And then the last thing we do is broadcast and event production. So really making sure that a school had every opportunity to utilize all the resources to get a program up and running, and then make sure that the ecosystem that was around that was built to the standards of a school like Ohio State. And now we work with a lot of universities at the same level. We work in 13 states running high school leagues, and the next couple of weeks we'll be announcing a bunch of really cool international projects. So it's been a really crazy long journey, but the best part of my job is we've gone from where we were in 2013, or if I talked to my university president at the time, they would have been like, this is great, but this is something that we're not ready to talk about yet. And that was the response that we got from 100 universities that we surveyed at the time. And now that's completely flipped, where there are now more than 120 universities that offer some level of esports scholarship. And all of those are starting to take really innovative approaches as to how to use esports as a really great platform. So I'm very excited to be a part of that. The folks up that are with me as well take really great roles in that space as well. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. Kevin Hong is an account manager at Twitch TV. Kevin works on the Twitch student program and has dedicated himself to creating gaming and esports opportunities for students and universities around the world. Kevin founded the Washington Gaming Association at the University of Washington. He was also an analyst with Team Solo Med, one of the most renowned sports organizations in the world. I was very anxious to have somebody from Twitch here today, and Kevin was nice enough to come. Please help me welcome Kevin.
Hi guys, my name is Kevin. Thank you so much, Paul, for having me. It's been great to just have everyone here in this room. This probably wouldn't have existed, having this kind of dialogue 5 years ago, so this is super cool, and I'm really excited to be here. So I guess a little bit about me. I've always been a gamer. I've really got involved in the gaming esports scene, I would say, during the Season 2 League of Legends World Finals. I was watching it on Twitch, where there was about 400,000 people watching it concurrently. It was like Taipei Assassins versus Azubu Frost. It was Korea versus Taiwan. And I saw like a sold-out stadium. And I was like, this really verified what I wanted to do in life. This gave me the confidence that I could pursue it. I've always been a passionate person about the underground scene. So right before I entered gaming and esports, I was a breakdancer. So I was doing that for like 7 years, and I really like movement and culture. So gaming and esports really, I felt that same level of culture there. So from there, I was doing corporate finance at Microsoft. I was getting my butt kicked by getting yelled at by people who were 45 years or older than me. Everyone there was older than me, and I just really learned a lot about corporate life. And I took that practice and my love for culture and applied that into the gaming space. From there, I started the Washington Gaming Association. I actually pitched to the University of Washington 3 years ago to build a gaming esports lounge. It's actually doing a grand opening next month. We put around $500,000 in building the space. It's about 1,000 square foot. So I'm really excited that I was able to bring that to University of Washington. I got involved in Twitch in 2015 when I started doing like freelance collegiate esports consulting after going to Heroes of the Dorm, which is an event brought by Blizzard in Seattle. It was on ESPN. UW was playing on ESPN, and that was part of my pitch deck, pitching to that. And I got really excited about college esports then. And from there, I was asked to join Twitch to help build out the Twitch student team. So I was the first hire, and we are now operating in 22 countries, helping colleges and universities all around the world building gaming and esports programs. I feel like North America is ahead of that pack because I think North America is the area that's really institutionalizing gaming and esports. And that's kind of like our mission at Twitch. It's not about Twitch. It's about empowering young people and giving them the confidence that, hey, you don't have to be the best Fortnite player. You can be involved in the community. There's so many ways to get involved in this industry, like Tyler said. So we focus on the 3 C's. It's career, community, and competition. So when we work with universities and colleges and high schools, we let them know that it's not just playing games. There's 3 pillars, and we need more people to work in this industry. We need engineers, we need finance people, we need business people, we need creatives. So it's like another industry. For us, it's all entertainment. End of the day, it's the same thing you're doing when you're watching Netflix or playing sports. It's all entertainment. From there, I guess our role as Twitch is more like general counsel. We see ourselves as helping universities. We understand that there's a spectrum. There's a lot of these schools that are trying to build esports program. They're far removed from the space, and they rely on Twitch to give them that front row seat of like, hey, these are the things that these other schools are doing, and we just give them all the knowledge and resources to make sure that they build the best programs as possible. So that's kind of our role. It's been a lot of fun. The next countries that I'm really excited about is we work really heavily with UK. We work with the British government in UK as part of the British Esports Association. We work with all the high schools there. We've partnered with the National University Esports League in UK as well, which runs across all the universities in UK. So there's a huge college to university progression system. College is the high school equivalent of UK. So that's really exciting. Spain is now coming online, Philippines, Vietnam. Everyone's kind of looking at North America and going, hey, how do we do that too? Which is really exciting. Now it's kind of like this rippling effect. So it's really cool to be here. So thank you so much, Paul, for having me.
Dr. Jeff Kuhn from OU. Jeff serves a split appointment here at OU, working for the Office of Instructional Innovation and in the Grid Lab. As a part of OU's Academic Ideation Accelerator, Jeff proposed bringing esports to OU in conjunction with opportunities for students to study esports, games, and the games culture in general. He is currently working within the university to formalize the student club, Bobcat Esports, which we've mentioned, into a varsity team here at OU. Jeff's research centers on how players distribute cognition and problem solve in video games and online communities. Jeff is in the mix here, figuring out how OU is going to move forward. It's hard for me to get too much out of him, but help me welcome Jeff.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, and I would definitely say what Paul said. The key words there are working towards, and I am bringing the university perspective to this panel in the sense of it's tricky to take a 200-year-old institution and say you have to move now, right? So a lot of universities are really jumping into esports. Since 2014, when Robert Morris became the first varsity program, we've seen hundreds of schools coming online with esports programs. Esports facilities are almost an arms race now, where Akron built a 5,000 square foot arena, and then Boise said, "Where ours is going to be 6," and Full Sail University said 11,000 square feet. The Fortress, they named it. So we're seeing this push. We're talking huge investment sums. Once again, Full Sail's putting in $6 million into an esports program. We're seeing the sizzle. In very few instances, we're seeing the steak, and certainly no one is showing us the bill for the dinner. And that's kind of where we are in a sense. So we're really trying to sort this out. So my journey in this began, I guess, decades ago as a gamer. I turned that love of games into my area of study. So working on games and learning how games can be used in education. And as Paul mentioned, I really saw an opportunity for esports at Ohio University, thought this will be great. And then I meet Chris and he's like, yeah, we're already doing that. So the Bobcat Esports organization, who's a member, by the way? All right, awesome. It is the largest student organization in the Mid-American Conference without a varsity team attached to it at the university level. So we have a strong student organization that is pushing towards having esports at the university. And so what I've done is started working with them, and then I was really fortunate in the sense that I got to start working with the executive director of campus recreation, Mark Ferguson, and I wrote her title down, the Assistant Director of Competitive Sports and Community Programs in Campus Recreation, Bridget Tasker, to start listening to the student organization. To his credit, the president, Dwayne Nellis, and his office started hearing about esports from other universities, and the office's first response is, what are the students doing and how can we help? Right. So Mark and Bridget and I have started working with Chris, Ivy O'Shaughnessy, and Adams Maslowski on what will it take, and probably my lesson learned coming into this is, my love of gaming will be enough to see it through. And, I talked to Mark and he says, what about an executive report? What about budgets? What about insurance liabilities? What about, these agreements? And you start to say, I have no idea what this is, how does all that look from a university perspective? So we have this issue of coming into a brand new culture, but bringing institutional norms with it. That's our big challenge right now. And by no means do I want to make these competitive, but the model that universities tend to look at is traditional sports, and it's a very different dynamic. Things with professionalism, amateurism, being paid. Can a student be on a varsity team and then go home at night and make money on Twitch? Can they compete as a private individual and compete on a varsity team? These are issues that we're really struggling with. A few years ago, the Pac-12 conference wanted to have a legitimate esports league and a conference, and it really broke down because the NCAA didn't know how to handle Title IX issues, and it didn't know how to handle amateurism rules. Right, so now we saw that kind of collapse. Then we saw the Mountain West. So all the Rocky Mountain schools have a big esports league. So they're running it. People are watching it to see how it goes. So we have those kind of issues. Meanwhile, we also have Activision Blizzard cutting 800 jobs this week, and Hearthstone is getting the axe in a lot of that. Blood is being shed at Electronic Arts. Last night they just announced that they're closing much of their Australian studios. ArenaNet just canceled or closed out 400 jobs just this week too. That makes the universities nervous. So what happens if we invest all this money into a game and then that game no longer gets supported? Basketball will never change. Rules changes to football take time. Esports moves much, much quicker. So how do we handle our investments? As Tyler mentioned, in the era of declining enrollment and budget cuts, can we make a investment into esports? University of Akron cut 20% of its degree granting programs while investing over $1 million into esports. I have a great quote here from the American Association of University Professors The leader, John McNay, he called it a serious lack of judgment, and we were violating the trust of the University of Akron students by playing games at the cost of learning. So there's this culture gap too. As gamers, we need to kind of step forward and show university administrators who have never engaged in games what games can be. CSGO is a great example. No university wants the branding of seeing terrorists win up on the screen and their logo. How do we handle that? We have to start negotiating that and working with them to understand this culture gap. Where do we meet in the middle? So where does the university ease up on some of its requirements, and where does gaming grow up so it can meet that halfway point? That's where we are, and it is a Wild West environment, so we're going to see where it goes.
Our final panelist, who was also here a year and a half ago when we had our first conference, Dana Kawar. And forgive me, I may mispronounce some of these new companies that you're involved in. Dana is currently the COO of StatShellix and a co-owner of, is it Flipside or Flipsid?
Flipside.
Flipside 3 Tactics. Dana is part of the team that built the technology powering the world's first interactive eSports broadcast. Flipside Tactics rosters managed by Dana have brought home over 20 championships in 4 years, including 5 world titles. Prior to her current role, Dana helped found and build the wildly popular Dota2Traders.com cosmetic item trading site. That you've got to explain to me. Dana, and the reason I'm so happy to have Dana at these conferences is she's a 20-year veteran in the competitive gaming industry, has held positions in every aspect of the industry you can think of: recruiting, scouting, talent, player management, consulting, social media and marketing, tournament organizing, and the creation of data and analytics software as well. I'm hoping Dana can provide sort of an independent, a more independent perspective on this issue of what is happening and what may happen to collegiate esports. Thank you, Dana.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me back again. It's always wonderful to be here. I actually am very excited about how OU is handling their sort of foray into esports. You know, I've had the pleasure of working with Chris a lot over this past year and a half, and I think that how you guys are going about it and starting with your students and starting with your own community and starting with your own space is exactly how gaming itself grew, right? Like, it's a very grassroots community. It's a very grassroots industry that grew into something much bigger than it was. Because of its love and its real fandom within its own community. And I think that now that it's becoming a little bit more mainstream, there's a lot of money coming into it very, very quickly, and not a whole lot of education around how that money is being spent, where that money is going, and what returns and scalability there is on these investments. As somebody who is both, you know, an entrepreneur in this space as well as an investor in this space, it's a very scary prospect to sort of look into the space and see how little education is being put behind a lot of major investment decisions that have a lot of ramifications on not only the investors within that project themselves, but, you know, everybody around it. A lot of people start getting, you know, scared when a big VC investment comes in very, very quickly, and hundreds of millions of dollars are spent in a very, very short time, you know, 6 months to a year. And within 18 months of that, you start hearing stories about how people have blown through, you know, 3/4 of $35 million investments in a very short period of time with very little returns. I find it a little bit ironic, especially for the collegiate esports space, how, you know, big educators are throwing money into building facilities without really founding these programs around them. And I think it's very, very important for the leadership to really start getting educated. That's one of my places within the spaces is I work as a consultant, I work as an educator, I work as a mentor in the space, hoping that my experience can, you know, really lead to growth and the correct returns. Because as a team owner myself, right, like it's it makes my brand stronger to be able to eventually, hire college graduate athletes as opposed to, unfortunately, a lot of cases, high school dropout athletes. I think that teammates work better together when they're educated. I think the university experience makes you a much stronger person. I have a master's degree myself, and it's just the learning process of getting that degree is very, very invaluable. So.
Before we turn over questions to the audience, I wanted Chris to start off with a question or two for the panel.
No pressure, right?
Yeah.
Kevin, I was actually really curious about Twitch's involvement with students, particularly with the program itself, and maybe what kind of interest you've seen from universities and the dynamic that's changed over time from its beginnings to where it is now, and maybe where you see it going in the future.
Yeah, I think last year and we project this year that a lot of major public institutions are now placing their bets, and I like their approach with these bigger schools because they can play it slow. I think the rush and the gold mine rush that happened in esports is also happening in collegiate esports. That's very well the case. So with these schools, we advise them on taking it slow. Collegiate esports has been around for 5 years. Basketball and football has been around for way longer than that. So there's really no rush. And we don't really go game specific because games, has a lot of volatility. So we just go, hey, you just need to build a space that's comfortable in your needs. Talk to your student base, and with the project at UCLA, at UW, and Utah, they started off small. They didn't really go. UW specifically, I'm going to use them as an example for most of this one is they didn't go right away announcing a varsity esports scholarship because that has ramifications with Title IX. We weren't really sure what the Pac-12 was doing because they were involved in that as well. So let's just take it slow. Let's build a space and just have the students use the space and see what happens. So their approach is, we know varsity will come in the play later, not right now. And as UW, we don't have an enrollment problem. We'll never have an enrollment problem, so we're okay. It's more about building. We're Huskies, so it's all about building Husky life and graduating proud Huskies and making sure they didn't feel disenfranchised. On my pitch deck, I had a sign that they put on Odegaard Library. It was do not play League of Legends from 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. It was on the sign in 2012. It was still on Yelp today. You can pull that image. I put that in my slide deck and saying, hey, you're putting this out and kicking out students who want to just game together because there's no space for them to game. But then here we are. We have he's iShiny. He's an Overwatch League player. He was playing on ESPN2 for Heroes of the Dorm. You have a current student who's on ESPN, but you're kicking out these types of students. And we have top players at the University of Washington. They just need a space. They don't really need the scholarship yet. So that's kind of our approach is the taking it slow path. And then to kind of come back 2 steps is our program, how we run is we're completely free. The Twitch student program is completely free. Our goal is just to get that educational spectrum, move educators along that spectrum, introduce them to you guys and your learnings, and just provide that information so that we can just get moving. We work heavily with the UCI eSports conference. They're doing it every year. They did one last year where they invited a bunch of educators out there. So having more dialogues like this is actually super healthy, and we predict that a lot of these will start happening more, which is great because what you're working on is something that 100 other educators are working on. The same problems. You're trying to build an esports facility on campus. How about you go down to UC Irvine and talk to Mark Deppy and just see what they're up to. Just having more of these types of interactions, I think that's super healthy.
Thank you. I did have a follow-up. Tyler, with the rapid development with all of these different organizations that are trying to act as governing bodies, how do you see this kind of coming together with everyone kind of taking their own piece of the cake right now? How are we going to bring this all together at the end of this?
I think for us, it kind of came down to a balance of listening and reacting, and then also kind of like to Jeff's point, talking about where gaming needs to kind of grow up, but also where the cultural change needs to shift to. So we always think about the way that the space is developing right now is you have a lot of club-focused tournament organizers that are sometimes really good at putting on events, really good at getting student engagement from the club level, but there's oftentimes a really strong disconnect between like that club organization and the university as a whole. And that can lead to a variety of challenges, but it mostly ends up in a position where students might be doing something really amazing without the support or knowledge of the university. So when we started to develop our system sort of to solve a lot of those challenges, going through all the questions that were mentioned around policies, whether you're talking about things like Title IX, whether you're talking about eligibility rules, like a variety of other things, our approach was to kind of take the, over a century of sports history, distill that all into, kind of what its core elements are, and then make those adjustments in the gaming side to kind of grow up to match those. So now we can go to any university and say, if you want to approach this problem, this challenge or this opportunity, here are the 6 different ways that you can try to do this. This might be the best approach for your university, and end up with this common set of standards that puts everybody on the same level. So our goal obviously is to end up being sort of the gold standard for how that applies. And I think that we're very good at sort of taking that historical approach and understanding that universities that have been around for, obviously much longer than I've been around, and most people that work at the universities now, and kind of deal with that change and kind of steering a very large boat in the right direction. And then taking like Kevin's approach, where if there are universities that aren't ready to take that step, make sure that we're always providing the foundation to make that possible in the future.
Very cool. Thank you.
We have a couple of mics here which are portable. Can you help us, Lana? Does anybody in the audience have questions of any of the panelists or to all the panelists? It's hard for me to say. Go ahead, right here. Make sure it's turned on. Just tap on it and you'll
Hey, this is for Tyler, more specifically. Just to give a background, I was a small college collegiate athlete, now in grad school here doing sports administration. I've noticed that you were saying that you kind of work with the more of the Power 5 schools, and I have a better general understanding of that. But do you find it difficult? Like right now, you see a lot of the smaller schools getting into esports, maybe because they feel like it can help with increase enrollment. Do you find a struggle with trying to convince some of these bigger schools that might not necessarily need it as much to convince them that this is something that would be worthwhile or worth their time?
Yeah, definitely. I think that when you work with a university that, sometimes has like 75,000 undergrads, and definitely has the interest in making recruitment more selective than increasing like the initial pool, all those things can be a benefit for sure. But the reason that when we work with schools, we kind of look at that holistic element is a university doesn't just care about recruitment. They're going to care about retention. They're going to talk about quality of life for the student. They're going to talk about differentiators, because even when you get to the Power 5 level, there's still a huge amount of competition between those schools about maybe not just the students that they're recruiting, but how are they perceived, not just here in the US, but around the rest of the world. So the way that we approached all of them was saying, this is something that you may not think that you need for the purpose of like recruitment at this point, but if you don't start taking action on this, then you will be kind of usurped by some of these smaller schools that are taking a more active approach, building programs in a really meaningful way, and those might be the students that you want. So we always start with the goals of each university and say, from a foundational perspective, we've set this basic standard, and if your goal is more focused on creating educational opportunity, more focused on research, more focused on dealing with things like your digital divide on campus, here's a way that esports can address that specific issue, and then working kind of within the parameters that we set for the system to deal with that. So part of it is it definitely helped by the hype around esports and the fact that people are now excited about it and that they will ask questions. And then our job is to make sure that we're kind of, again, bridging that gap and making sure that we have the answers for them. So there are definitely some universities that still have administrators that are of the opinion that like video games are the product of the devil and should not be supported on campus in any way. So in that case, we have the benefit of peer pressure where we can say like, listen, 20 of the top universities across the country have decided that this is, what they're going to do. And they're doing it so well that your university is missing out a lot. And so maybe you don't personally believe in this, but the stats that we can bring to this show that. And when we have those conversations, we also bring a lot of stats from the high school level. So we have the benefit of our National High School League where we can pull out all kinds of stats that say, on average, 72% of gamers or 70% of students in any given school self-identify as gamers. And when they're talking about their college considerations, esports is now one of the things that they're looking for. So maybe those same students that you would have had no problem recruiting before are now looking for different things. And so there's a huge, crazy list of things that we try to address, and we could probably spend hours talking about that, but those are the basic premises that we try to address.
Anybody else? Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
So I think one of the things that you bring up is a very good point of these smaller schools. They can't afford to develop a football program. They can't develop a traditional sports program. Building a stadium is expensive. Building an esports arena is really cost efficient. And so you have that opportunity to retain a player base. And kind of going on to what Tyler says, if you look at the data, high school athletics has remained flat over the last few years because more girls are participating, and that's keeping it flat. Otherwise, you're seeing like 11-player football is starting to go down. Now, traditional football is in no way in danger, but it's starting to drop. You look at the middle schools, it's dropping even more in terms of participation. For universities, the traditional path has been student, alumni, donor, and the vehicle of communication for that process has been football, traditional sports. What is homecoming? So what happens when you have 23% of college students watching traditional football and 37% watching esports? There's going to have to be this change of how do you get future donors? How do you get future alumni engaged if they're not participating in what you think is the normal communication channels with them? Smaller schools saw that earlier because they're fighting for every student. When you have 70,000 students, you can let it go for a little bit.
Just come on up.
So in some of your discussions, you were talking about varsity level sports. Does looking at it from an intramural sports perspective change the conversation in any way, and how so?
Anybody?
Yeah, anybody.
I think the conversation's even a little bit more complicated than that. Universities right now have a choice to enter esports in a variety of ways. So intramural level, varsity level, but even at the professional level, there's nothing stopping OU today from fielding, a 5-man Counter-Strike team and going through a major qualifier and participating in the major. So I think that the most important thing right now, and I think the biggest differential, is that universities need to better understand their player base, their sort of student base, and see what sort of fits their mold. Because even regionally within the United States, the games that people play are very, very different.
And we look at it when we help people develop programs in helping to identify those communities and program efficiently for it. So normally we kind of follow what you'd find in traditional sports to a degree and then add more esports stuff to it. So you have like your formalized program, which is going to be, what looks a little bit more like your varsity football team, your club team, which will look a lot like, the traditional RSOs and things like that. Intramurals can definitely be a part of that because there will definitely be a divide between your larger student body in terms of skill and what you're going to put on your formalized team, just like you'd have in athletics. And then we also talk about the general student population that may be really into gaming, but maybe they don't care about esports. Because there's definitely, when we talk about even like the gender divide, 50-50 roughly men and women in terms of gaming, but it's really heavily skewed towards male in esports. So we're always trying to think about how do we include all those folks in using esports as a platform. So it may not be talking about competition or it may be different levels of competition, but it also might be just making sure that when your university is playing, whether it's a club team or when you get to a formalized level, doing that, making sure that you're running viewing parties, having LAN parties, other opportunities for those students to engage with each other. And you end up with a really, really, really strong community. And then another focus that we've had is tying in like the high school community to those universities. So you end up with this really strong like city-based or region-based community that is addressing a lot of those different things. And again, with the focus on making sure that there's an opportunity for students that might have a tendency to isolate, to find some incentive to actually go beyond that. And we see crazy benefits from the high school side when they see that opportunity. They show up to class more, they're more likely to graduate. They see really great performance from a social perspective, and then they also talk a lot more about applying to college. So all sorts of cool stuff.
Just to add one thing to what you're saying too, I think that universities have a decision to make as well, you know, as far as if they want to enter into only competitive gaming or all professional gaming, right? Competitive esports is fantastic, and you can go into these competitions and play these competitive games, but there's a lot of sort of forays into gaming that involve being professional gamers that have nothing to do with competition. So there's a lot of professional streamers that are professional gamers, right? They're paid to play video games, but, you know, in no way take part in these competitions.
Two things to add here. From the club perspective, in intramural versus varsity, there's a lot of different ways that we enter tournaments through Collegiate Star League, through TESPA, just to name a few. And to give an example of that, our TESPA team went third nationally this year, and they took home a $1,250 scholarship each. They were played against, in that same league, varsity teams. So there's so many different ways to enter in these different groups. There's so many different dynamics that we can bring to the table to encourage community participation, which is really exciting. Honestly, I think we could do both, really. I think you can have a varsity team and still have an intramural team or intramural community. And then I was going to add into your comment, but now I've forgotten my train of thought. So I'll just go ahead and pass this back.
Any other questions?
So you've been talking a lot about, from the player perspective, collegiate esports, but I was wondering, I feel like alumni, Jeff, you sort of touched on this, donors, are sort of a barrier because esports is not necessarily something that alumni will watch because collegiate sports in general have sort of become this like space for universities to showcase to alumni like, hey, you should donate to us because of these big programs. So how do you expect to like get people interested from like a fan perspective, like, hey, this is a reason that you should donate to our university, like this performance that we're doing with esports?
Time and money. You know, as soon as you land a cushy job at Facebook or Amazon and start throwing cash our way, hey, the quicker you can do that, the better. That would be the flippant answer. But it really kind of comes down to, you know, we have two main issues here, right? So we have everything in esports is happening so rapidly, but the time to turn student to alumni to possible donor, that's decades long, right? So we have a discrepancy in time, right? So in the meantime, we have to kind of trust that, you know, build it and they will come sort of approach. And that really brings up the second big issue here is, you know, getting video games normalized on college campuses is going to be the big thing. You know, it's not just esports. That's really the important part here. Throughout our lives and, you know, and through our parents' lives and things like that, there have been four main literacies, right? There's books, movies, film, and television. And universities have always dedicated spaces to those literacies. We have libraries, we have movie theaters, we have music venues. Now it's time for video games to, you know, to appear. You know, a new media literacy has appeared, to say it. We're not building those spaces. So part of this thing with esports is not just competition, but it's to say, look, video games are legitimate media. Students are involved. We need to dedicate space to it. And that's often the way I've really been approaching it in talking with, you know, administrators, talking with people who are looking for this information is what is the value? It's like, well, we've done it other places. This is no different. You know, give it that space. And only once we have the space, give it the proper respect as we do these other media literacies, we'll buy ourselves the time for the alumni to appear and to donate and to support.
I can't see it there. Yeah. Well,
as someone who is involved in Bobcat Esports, but at the same time also a Twitch streamer, and this goes across the whole panel, I guess, what would the course of action be for an individual to be able to separate their audience from the professional esports end of things, and then at the same time the personal, like, creative side of their Twitch channel? Would there be certain stipulations in check? Would there be certain things added? You mentioned handling revenue and things of that nature. And so I just figured I'd ask the panel as a whole as to what your guys' idea was on handling that.
This was something that we get asked quite frequently, and when it comes to students monetizing, you're part of the Bobcat Esports Club. What's your stream? What's your Twitch ID? Habit? You got the name Habit? Oh, okay. I'll drop you a follow. But anyway, so I think it's perfectly okay for student creators to monetize. There's a handful of students that I've identified that's making more money than I am at Twitch by just streaming full time, raking in $5,000-$10,000 a month. Like, that's insane. And that's awesome. They're paying for their tuition while going to full-time school. That's the ecosystem that we love, and that's what makes Twitch powerful as a platform, is that people can now express themselves in a different way in a live medium, bringing in an audience that they were able to capture. And from there, we think that's really healthy. And then from there, we also found out there's a bunch of students on Twitch that are making enough to pay for all their books for the year. Even just that small amount of that, it's a much smaller amount, but it's something there, and they don't have to work part-time at somewhere else to get that money, right? They can just stream from their dorm or from their apartment. So that kind of ecosystem is really cool. We've talked to administrators about, hey, they're playing on a varsity esports program, but they have their own channel. Do we get that money from their channel? And we say no, because that's not how Twitch doesn't really do MLM, multi-level, like we don't syndicate all that into one to where your students are just streaming for you. If you're gonna be doing an esports program where you want to monetize your stream, so we educate. So this is our approach: is we found. I'll take 3 steps back now. So creators love 3 things. They love money, fame. They want money, fame, and love. Right? For being a Twitch streamer, that's the 3 things you care about. That's just part of that industry. What we've noticed now for schools is they built a 4th layer, which is education. So let's say the school wants to go all in on. So UCI Esports has a pretty good stream. They create internship opportunities for students to come stream on their channel or to come put together the production. So there's an educational play there where they're earning something else in return of for exchanging their time. So I'm taking this UCI internship program where I work on the stream for 10 hours a week. In return, I'm getting 2 class credits or $10 an hour or whatever amount, right? So there's an exchange there where, that money, that time you spent making that stream isn't sacrificed, which is some schools are doing that. And we kind of, hey, if they then stream on their own channel, that they should monetize on their own channel. And that's the way that we've noticed. And there's thousands of Twitch streamers who aren't part of their esports club, and they're just full-time student on campus, and they're killing it on Twitch without being part of the esports program. So unless I don't think that's where I don't think it's okay or right for the school to cannibalize on an audience that X student built for themselves. These are the money that they're making to pay for tuition, and tuition's not cheap. So I'm pretty adamant about that. We can definitely reach out to me and chat more, or I'll drop by your stream.
And I'll add in from the governance side, there is some trade-offs because we look at it from the perspective of the university with like risk mitigation and other challenges that are kind of unique to the college environment. So you kind of think about it of like, if you choose to associate yourself with the team and like identify yourself as such on stream, the basic expectation would be you're following the university of code of conduct, you're representing the university at that point, and that you have the proper permissions to do so. And it's not as free and creative as it once was, but it's all designed to make sure that while the majority of people are really great citizens of the internet and do really awesome things to kind of showcase what a student can do, there are people that will always try to abuse that systems, and so we put like those safeguards in place for it. And then also add like more support for streaming on the other side as well. I think there's some people like way in the back too.
Okay, we've got time probably for one more question. You want to come up to the microphone, or Lana, do you want to find them? Right there.
I've got my workout in for the day. My main question is about Title IX, because how does this, I've got 2 questions really, and they're both about gender equality. You mentioned that it's 50-50 interest in gaming for men and women, but a lot of the gaming for women is on iPhones, Candy Crush, games like that. I have a fear that we're doing the same thing that collegiate sports did at the start, which is focus on the male aspect. When you look at esports, the way it's marketed, the colors it uses, the type of atmosphere it creates, is very male-centric and male-dominant. When it really could be a 50-50 event. You could have an elite esports team with 2 women, 2 men on it. So how does that work with Title IX? How do you work as an industry to try to make sure that in 40 years from now, we're arguing again that women don't have access to something that they very much should?
So from our perspective, we didn't want to start that way. So we started with the concept of this is a student first opportunity. It needs to be equitable for everyone, at least in terms of access. But also acknowledging the fact that, like I mentioned, esports is like 90-ish% male, generally speaking. So like there's a pretty big divide there. So what we ended up doing, similar to like how we designed our governance system, was we looked at programs like computer science, general STEM majors, and the crazy efforts that are going in to increase the diversity in those industries. And then from our side, look at the benefit of starting with high school students and starting to normalize things. Like there was definitely a time, like even when I started playing Counter-Strike, that having a woman even like talking about gaming was weird. And that led to demonization and a really hostile environment. And we've come a long way from there, but we're still not anywhere close to where we need to be. So acknowledging those problems, making sure that universities are talking about that, and then dealing with the fact that this isn't something you can just flip a switch and change overnight. So you start with a high school level, and like we work with all of our coaches to do subconscious bias training, to provide marketing materials that are generally more gender neutral. And as well as acknowledging the fact that sometimes like women as one category just don't want to be competitive. The same is true for males, and making sure that there are opportunities within that program that may be non-competitive roles. But we find that in our high school scene, the majority of our managers and like leadership positions are women. There's still a relatively small minority relative to the number of male players. But those are significant statistics. So we always try to figure out how do we identify where the real problems are, identify the core issues, and then start working towards that. And then making sure that we're making really strong allies in our administrative folks on every campus, that they acknowledge the problem, they're using data approaches to that, and starting addressing. So we acknowledge as an industry, and I hope, and most of us, I think, across the board have acknowledged that we're not very good at that yet, and then trying to take those active steps. And having people yell at us when we're doing something that's like not in line with that is always really helpful, because occasionally you get like self-aggrandizing or start to lose track of that mission. So, it's a constant feedback loop.
Listen, I want to thank, this was a wonderful panel. Thank you all very much. Please. There are several more panels, both in the theater and here in the ballroom, that really are terrific subject matter. Please take a look at the agenda and make sure you are here at 4 o'clock for not just our keynote speaker from Amazon Game Studios, but some really cool announcements about other things that are coming up in the next month. And thank you all for coming.